Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're about to take another deep dive today into some newly declassified files.
Ooh, exciting.
I know, right? And this time we're looking at some FBI files from 1949 and 1950.
Wow. So like right at the beginning of the whole flying saucer craze?
Exactly. It's a really fascinating period.
Definitely.
So we're talking about reports from all over the U.S.
Okay, like where?
Well, we've got Charleston, West Virginia,
Okay.
Oak Ridge, Tennessee, even Roswell, New Mexico, all the hot spots.
Wow. So like the big question is, I guess, are we dealing with just misidentified objects or,
Or is there something more to it?
right, something truly unexplained?
That's what we're here to find out.
Awesome. I'm ready.
Okay, so let's start with this report from Charleston, West Virginia, September of '49. So a pilot reports seeing this bright yellow rocket-shaped object during a flight. And he even goes into detail about how there's, like, no visible propulsion, almost like he's trying to make sense of what he's seeing,
Yeah, like he's ruling things out. It's interesting.
But here's where it gets kind of weird.
Yeah.
Just a few months later, in a 1950 document, the Air Force is claiming that Project Sightings.
That was their flying saucer investigation, right?
Yeah, they're saying it was discontinued in December of '49. They're claiming that over 75% of the reports they were getting were misidentified.
Okay.
Weather balloons, airplanes, that kind of thing. But if they were so sure, it was all just misidentifications.
Right. Like why even bother shutting down the project?
Exactly. It makes you wonder, especially with all the Cold War anxieties going on at the time.
Yeah, it's almost like they didn't want people thinking about aliens when they should be worried about the Soviets or something.
Right, like they couldn't afford to have mass panic about little green men when they're worried about, the big red one.
Right.
But here's the thing, despite the official line that the Air Force was putting out, these reports kept coming in. Oh yeah, throughout 1950. And I mean, some were dismissed, sure, but some were serious enough that, different government agencies were getting concerned.
Huh. Like what kind of reports are we talking about?
Well, there's a bunch from Oak Ridge, Tennessee, March 1950.
Oak Ridge, that was a pretty important place back then.
Huge. It was a vital atomic energy facility. So if there really were unidentified objects flying over it,
That's a big deal.
yeah, the implications are huge, right? And you can see that in the documents, like there's a sense of urgency.
Got it.
They're trying to figure out what they're dealing with, but they're also trying to keep things quiet.
Right. Understandable.
So a newly operational radar station at Oak Ridge starts picking up these unidentified objects. And this isn't just like blips on a screen,
Yeah, what were they seeing?
Radar operators are describing objects moving at crazy speeds and altitudes, like way beyond anything they were familiar with.
Wow.
And obviously the Atomic Energy Commission, the AEC, they're freaking out.
Makes sense.
I mean, this is Oak Ridge. So they reach out to the Air Force and the Navy to try and verify these readings.
Right.
But instead of a coordinated response, they basically run into a bureaucratic wall.
Oh, no.
I mean, it's comical.
What happened?
There's confusion about who has jurisdiction. They can't find anyone qualified to actually examine the radar unit.
So wait, they have this super sensitive facility?
Right.
Potential unidentified objects showing up on radar.
Exactly.
And no one knows who's supposed to deal with.
It's crazy, right?
What happened next? Did they ever figure out what was going on at Oak Ridge?
Well, the documents we have don't really give us a clear resolution.
Huh. Really?
Yeah, which honestly makes it even more intriguing, right? Like,
Right.
the fact that it wasn't just dismissed outright suggests that it was something they couldn't easily explain away.
I see what you mean.
It makes you wonder, what did those radar operators really see and why all the secrecy surrounding it?
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've got a pilot in West Virginia seeing something strange, radar anomalies over a top secret facility. Right.
This is just the beginning, right?
Oh, yeah, we're just scratching the surface.
I can't wait to hear more.
Okay, so before we move on to even more intriguing reports, let me just ask you, we're talking about stuff that happened over 70 years ago. Why should anyone listening today even care about this?
That's a good question. I think it's because these documents give us a glimpse into a time when our understanding of the world was being challenged, like in a really fundamental way.
Yeah, it's like people were encountering things they couldn't explain.
Right. And that's something that still resonates with us today, I think. That search for answers, that confrontation with the unknown.
It's like even though technology and our understanding of the universe have come a long way, that basic human experience of seeing something we can't explain, that's timeless. Right.
Totally. I think so.
And it makes you wonder, what if some of these sightings really were something truly unexplained? How would that change our view of history? of science, of ourselves even.
Right.
And as we dig deeper into these reports, we'll see how that tension between belief and skepticism, between wanting answers and confronting the limits of what we know, played out on a national stage. It's going to be fascinating.
Okay, so buckle up, everyone, because things are about to get even more interesting. We'll be uncovering more witness accounts, exploring how the government tried to make sense of it all, and trust me, you won't want to miss it.
I'm ready. Let's do it. Welcome back to the show, everyone, where we're exploring those declassified FBI documents from, 1949 and 1950.
Right at the start of the whole flying saucer craze.
It was a wild time, wasn't it?
Totally. And for anyone who might be just tuning in, we're really trying to get to the bottom of whether these sightings were just, misidentified objects.
Right.
Something truly unexplained.
The age-old question.
Exactly. And we've already touched on how the government was, well, kind of struggling to respond to all these reports.
It's a tricky situation, right?
Totally. I mean, they want to investigate, but they also don't want to create a panic.
Yeah. Got to keep the public calm.
Right. Walking that fine line. But the documents we're looking at today, they give us a little peek behind the curtain.
Ooh, I like that.
We see their internal debates and the challenges they're facing.
You realize they were just people too, huh?
For sure. Okay, so let's jump into another report. This one takes us to Elmira, New York, April 1950.
Okay.
So picture this. You're an FBI agent, and you get a call about a flying saucer landing.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You're probably thinking like sleek metallic disc,
Yeah.
right?
Something out of the movies.
Exactly. But this wasn't your typical UFO.
Oh, what was it?
The report describes it as a container box, about 3 feet in diameter, painted aluminum, with a Crosley radio tube attached to the center.
A radio tube.
Really?
I know, right? It
Yeah.
sounds more like a science project than some alien spaceship.
Kind of a letdown, huh?
Yeah, you'd think so. But there are these little details that make you wonder.
Like what?
Well, the report mentions these red flares attached to the bottom of the box.
And they'd apparently scorched the grass underneath.
Huh. Interesting.
And get this, the box itself was too fragile to transport.
Really? So, they couldn't even examine it properly?
Nope. Talk about frustrating.
It is. It's like having a piece of the puzzle but not being able to fit it in.
Exactly. And that's a recurring thing with a lot of these reports.
Really?
We get these intriguing clues, but then, poof, no concrete evidence to really draw any conclusions.
Makes it hard to know what to believe.
Doesn't it? But that's what makes digging through these files so interesting, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
We get to play detective a little bit.
Oh, I like that.
Look for patterns, connect the dots, try to make sense of it all.
That's the fun part.
And speaking of connecting the dots, this Elmira thing brings up something we've kind of been dancing around.
Which is?
Hoaxes.
Yeah.
Was this just some prank, Or was something actually unexplained happening?
A tough question.
Yeah.
Especially given the lack of evidence.
Yeah. And I think it's important to keep in mind that amidst all the, let's say, credible reports, there were bound to be some that,
Wasn't so credible.
exactly. People got swept up in the excitement. Right. Maybe they wanted to contribute to the story, even if it meant, embellishing a bit.
I could see that.
Right. So how do we, as people looking back at this from, decades later, how do we separate the real from the fake? What should we be thinking about when we look at these reports?
That's a good question. I think one thing to consider is the source.
Yeah.
Who's making the report?
Right. Like, is it someone trained to observe things?
Yeah, like a pilot or maybe a radar operator. Or is it someone who, might be more likely to misinterpret what they saw?
And then there's the context.
Yeah.
Like, what else was happening at the time that might have influenced people's perceptions?
Good point. We
Oh.
can't forget about the Cold War.
Oh, yeah. That was a huge factor.
I mean, any weird thing in the sky could easily be seen as a threat from the Soviets.
Exactly. So you've got that fear, plus all the media frenzies surrounding UFOs.
The perfect recipe for speculation. Hoaxes.
Right. And yet,
Got that.
I think it's also important to remember that most people who were reporting these things, they were just trying to make sense of something they couldn't explain.
They weren't necessarily trying to cause a panic.
Or become part of some big conspiracy.
Right.
They were just everyday people having these crazy experiences.
Makes sense.
And those experiences, whether they ended up being explained or not, they had a real impact on their lives.
I can imagine. Okay, speaking of impact, let's switch gears a bit.
Okay, where are we going?
Roswell, New Mexico.
Oh, here we go.
The holy grail of UFO lore.
It's unavoidable, right?
And the documents we're looking at today, they give us a glimpse into how the area was connected to sightings, even in the years after that famous 1947 incident,
The big one.
the one that started it all. Now, the documents themselves, they don't actually cover the supposed crash,
Right.
but they do highlight how Roswell continued to be this hotbed for UFO activity.
Like a magnet.
Exactly. For example, there's this report from July 1950, just 3 years after the supposed crash. And a pilot says he encountered 3 flying saucers while flying near Roswell.
Wow. 3 of them.
The report's pretty short. Not much detail about what they looked like or what they were doing.
Kind of vague.
Yeah. But just the fact that it happened in Roswell,
Adds to the mystique.
doesn't it? Makes you wonder if these sightings were connected to the 1947 incident, or if they were just totally separate events that happened to occur in the same place.
I mean, it's Roswell, right?
Right. It's a question that sparked a lot of debate over the years, but I think it also raises a broader question about how we interpret history, especially when it comes to these mysterious events.
What do you mean?
Well, we tend to look for patterns, connections, even if they're not really there.
We like to have a story.
Exactly. It's human nature to try and make sense of things.
To find a narrative that fits our understanding of the world.
Right. And sometimes that narrative, it takes on a life of its own, regardless of the actual evidence.
The story becomes bigger than the facts.
Exactly. But I think that's part of what makes history so fascinating.
Okay, I see.
It's not static, it's a conversation.
We're constantly reinterpreting the past.
And these documents, they invite us to participate in that conversation, to challenge our assumptions, to consider multiple perspectives.
So it's like we're piecing together a puzzle.
But we might not have all the pieces.
And that's okay.
It is. Sometimes the search for answers is just as important as the answers themselves.
Love that. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into those declassified FBI files, everyone. We've been uncovering some pretty wild stuff from the early days of the flying saucer craze.
Haven't we? 1949, 1950. It was a really interesting time.
Yeah, a lot of people were seeing things they couldn't explain.
And the government was trying to figure out how to handle it all.
Trying to investigate without, causing a panic.
Right. A tricky balance.
Definitely. But in this last part, we thought we'd look at some of the more out there reports.
The ones that make you scratch your head a little.
Yeah, the ones that really push the limits of believability.
Because, let's be honest, amongst all of the serious reports, there were some that were just plain strange.
Definitely. But I think those strange reports tell us something interesting, too.
What do you mean?
Well, they show us how much the UFO phenomenon captured people's imaginations.
It definitely sparked a lot of speculation.
Right. And I think sometimes it led to people creating stories that, well, maybe weren't entirely based in reality.
I can see that. People get caught up in the excitement.
Exactly. So what's the wildest report you came across?
Well, there's this one from March 1950 that's really intriguing and really vague, unfortunately. It mentions this Air Force investigator who claimed that 3 flying saucers had been recovered in New Mexico.
Roswell, again, you've got to be kidding me. It's like everything goes back to Roswell.
It does, doesn't it? But this report, it goes on to describe these saucers as being, get this, roughly 50 feet in diameter.
50 feet. That's huge. We're not talking about some little disc here.
Nope, this is a serious piece of hardware.
No. And wait, it gets even crazier.
Oh, yeah.
Each saucer was supposedly occupied by 3 bodies.
Okay, now we're getting into some sci-fi territory.
Right. Were they little green men? What did they look like?
Not quite little green men. The report describes them as human shape but only 3 feet tall, dressed in metallic cloth of a very fine texture.
So tiny astronauts in shiny suits.
Basically. Pretty vivid image, isn't it?
It is. But, as you said, the report's pretty vague. What happened to these bodies? Where were the saucers taken? Like, come on, give us some details.
I know, right? Unfortunately, that's all we get. And, like with a lot of these more sensational reports, the informant wanted to stay anonymous.
So we're left with more questions than answers.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Was it a real alien encounter? A hoax? Or just someone letting their imagination run wild? We may never know.
But it definitely adds to the mystery.
Doesn't it? And I think it shows how these reports, even the ones that seem far-fetched, they really played a role in shaping how people thought about UFOs.
They got people talking, debating, speculating.
Exactly. They made people question what they thought they knew about the world.
And it wasn't just the public either, right? I mean, we've seen how the government was grappling with these reports, too.
Oh, yeah. They were trying to walk that fine line between investigating and avoiding mass panic.
A tough job.
For sure.
And, as we wrap up this deep dive, it strikes me how relevant these documents still feel today.
I agree. It's been over 70 years, but we're still asking the same questions.
Are we alone? What else is out there?
Those big questions.
Exactly. And I think these documents, even the ones that seem a little out there, They remind us to stay curious, to keep asking those questions.
To be open to the possibility that there's more to the universe than we currently understand.
Well said. So, to everyone listening, next time you're looking up at the night sky and you see something you can't explain, don't be afraid to wonder.
Don't dismiss it.
Ask questions.
Yeah.
Because you never know. You might just stumble onto a mystery that's as fascinating as the ones we've talked about today.
And who knows, maybe those FBI files will have some answers for you.
That's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the past. And remember, keep looking up. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.